The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. So, having reviewed Shirley Jackson's final and, to be perfectly honest, rather underwhelming work, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, I thought I might take a look now at what I consider to be her greatest work. Now, I have actually already done a review of this book on my channel early in my channel's history, but it was pretty lame. It was just a still shot of the book with me talking over it, and it was probably way too rambly and digressive. So you can check that out if you want. But I thought now, with October upon us and leading up to Halloween, I might take the opportunity to revisit with a perhaps advanced perspective one of the very few books that has ever managed to truly frighten me. So join me, won't you? So, what is The Haunting of Hill House about? Well, it is the story of the titular Hill House, a purportedly haunted estate located in an undisclosed area surrounded by hills. One amateur paranormal investigator named Dr. Montague is looking to spend a summer in Hill House and hopefully write a book about the supposedly paranormal and supernatural occurrences that transpire within the house's walls. And he reaches out to several people who have had paranormal experiences of their own in the past, I guess in the hopes that there is something about them, magnetic perhaps, that might draw out the house's oddities and peculiarities, and so make them easier to document and transcribe and study. And he reaches out to Eleanor Vance, a young, reserved, and honestly quite repressed woman who has led a rather insular and sheltered life, caring for her domineering, infirm mother up until this point, and Theodora, a kind of free spirit, bohemian, artistic type young woman who is subtly implied to be a lesbian. This was written back in the 1950s, before a lot of authors were willing to just come right out and explicitly portray a character as queer. And then, of course, Luke, who is the heir to Hill House and will at some point own the house, whose permission they're kind of going off of to stay in the house. So these four principal characters, Dr. Montague, Eleanor, the main character, Theodora, and Luke, go to spend a summer in Hill House, and then spooky shit goes down. So this book is not what a lot of people expect it to be, and I think that's why I've seen a lot of reviews of people who don't like the book. I've especially seen reviews of people taking issue with the fact that the book, at first glance, can't really decide what it wants to be. Whether it wants to be a literal, explicitly supernatural story about a genuinely haunted house, or a psychological character study of a woman who is rapidly losing her hold on reality. And I've seen people on YouTube say that with a lot of these stories like this, especially with the works of Edgar Allan Poe, there's always kind of that ambiguous element where maybe supernatural stuff happens, but it could all just be in the character's head. This book is not like that. It is both explicitly supernatural, but it also has a very heavy dose of psychology to it. That is, it is also a character study of a woman whose mind, whose psyche is rapidly unraveling. And a lot of people, including myself, when I first read this book, when I first read it, I was kind of caught off guard with the tone of it, because it was just so odd. Because you don't really expect books to be like that. You expect them to either just go for the all-out, spooks and scares, the haunting part, just a horror story, or it to just be a quiet character study with potentially supernatural elements, a la The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, which it can go either way. This book can't. The house is explicitly haunted. There are actual things in the house. Although what's interesting to note is that I don't think it's ever stated what actually haunts the house, and I like that a lot, because it's kind of like that. If you've ever seen the movie 1408, which is an adaptation of a Stephen King short story, the hotel room 1408 is haunted, but not by dead people, or at least not solely by dead people. I like that because ghosts are kind of cliche. It's just kind of expected, like somebody died in this house and they lingered after death. Not so. There is something much like in 1408. There's something inherently malevolent, I think, about the house, and there are dead people that have died. There are people that have died there who still linger on, but I think it's kind of implied that there's something else, something more sinister behind it all. But Eleanor is a very, as I said, repressed young woman whose life has been kind of burdened with the care of her domineering mother, and who has subsequently kind of been insulated from basically the world. And now she finds herself put into an environment that is basically kind of demonic, and as a result, her mind rapidly starts to come undone, and the house starts to have a very negative effect on her. So we also get the psychological aspects that Shirley Jackson is so good at. And it's a book that when I first read it, I mean, I was scared because there, as I've mentioned previously, there is one scene in particular in this book that scared me pantless. Whenever they see something outside and then they just run, or one of the characters says run, don't look at it, don't look back, and then Eleanor runs. And the book never explains what it is that they're running from, but of course, the unknown is always scarier than the known. And that scene is just, it cemented this book as one of the scariest things I've ever read. But also at work in this story are some undertones because all of Shirley Jackson's books more work in a they works more in a more subdued kind of way. As the story, the principal events that are being depicted are at the surface, but underneath that there are some more things going on. Mainly what's happening with Eleanor as her mind is slipping, but also the sexuality implied around the character of Theodora, and perhaps how there may or may not be some kind of sophic attraction between Eleanor and Theodora, because they do become pretty close. And Shirley Jackson's books were never explicitly sexual, but there's always that kind of just hint under the surface again of the carnal. But this book is a powerhouse work, and it's also very well written, incredibly well written, because Shirley Jackson was a very good writer. Numerous authors and famous writers of great renown have attested to this book's power. Stephen King wrote at length about this book and considered it to be just one of the greatest works of horror ever, or at least of the 20th century, and I do not disagree, and that's rare that I actually agree with Stephen King on something, but this book is something else. Now, it's a very slow burn. It's not something, again, if you go into this expecting, like, the walls to start bleeding, like in Amityville or whatnot, or a bunch of, like, clocks to start running backwards, or things just to start, happening that's like, oh, the ghosts are here, you should be scared. It is not like that. It is a very gradual immersion into the horror of this place. And the horror is of a much more psychological nature, but damn, is it scary. So there's not much more, I guess, that I can say about The Haunting of Hill House. I guess you just have to read it. I don't know if there's any, grand message or meaning, but it is a fantastic character study, I thought, and one of the greatest horror novels I have ever read because it genuinely managed to scare me. So, to rate The Haunting of Hill House, I would give this book a solid A, if not A plus, at the very least a solid A, because I think this book hit all the marks. I think everything it wanted to do, it did, and it did with flying colors. The characters, or at least the principal character of Eleanor, is very well rendered. There is a scene in particular towards the beginning of the book as she is making her way to Hill House to stay, where she's in a restaurant and she sees a young girl pitching a fit, a young, like, toddler girl pitching a fit because she's not being given her favorite sippy cup. And it's a very very great little scene where Shirley Jackson is able to render to us the psychological outlook of this character in a very subtle shade. Because Eleanor, as we know, her life has been so repressed and stifled up until this point. But as she's seeing the little girl throwing a fit, she acknowledges that most people, and perhaps all the people around them, are wanting the little girl to just shut up and, just calm down and get on with things. But Eleanor's like, no, you stand your ground. You stick to your guns until you get your favorite sippy cup. Because if you don't, you know, what other happiness are you going to have except that which you can bring about yourself? Basically, it's kind of her seeing a younger version of herself, I guess, being kind of with things not going as she would have them, but really wanting the girl to just not give up and just keep up the fight. And it's a really great little scene, and it can be kind of lost on you if you're not really attuned to what's going on, but it just adds another layer to the psychology of this book, which is really quite stellar. So yeah, I think this is definitely an A level work. So The Haunting of Hill House. Have you read The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I have said about it here today. If you have not read The Haunting of Hill House, I would definitely recommend this book, especially if you are a fan of horror, if you are wanting something to read that will give you a fright. This will probably do it if you're open to it and if you're willing to to bear with the slow pace of it and kind of just get into the as I said, the gradual immersion of it, the very slow burn that is this book. It can still frighten you. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to like, subscribe, help the channel out a little bit. I would greatly appreciate it. And until next time, peace.